Byline Audio. This episode is brought to you by Abercrombie. There's nothing better than the perfect jean and going out top combo, or an outfit that perfectly matches your plans. Abercrombie's relaxed jean goes with every occasion. Date nights with something lace, or daytime with a cozy sweater. And their barrel jean will surprise you. It's the trend that will become a staple in your wardrobe. Abercrombie denim comes in tons of rises, fits, and washes. Find your perfect pair online or in store.
Hello and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times. My name is Adrian Goldberg, recording this episode on the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Talking to us from Kyiv is opposition MP Inna Sovsun. Inna is a member of the Liberal pro-European party Holos and was a minister with responsibility for higher education from 2014 to 2016. We're talking as well in the aftermath of Germany's election, which has seen the new Chancellor-designate, Friedrich Merz, say that Donald Trump was, and I quote, largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. Inna, welcome to the Byline podcast once again. What do you make of Friedrich Merz's comments?
Well, I do think that in that sense, he did reflect the thinking of many Europeans, particularly over the last couple of weeks. What we have seen, the statements made by Trump, the actions taken by his team, particularly the direct conversation with Russia over the head of Ukrainians, but also the rest of Europeans, that clearly does point into one direction. And I think that Mr. Merz, he just pointed that out very, very clearly and obviously. The big question, both to Mr. Merz and to other European leaders, is how they're going to react to that, if they recognize it as a fact. It's not enough just to recognize a fact, especially if you're about to lead the biggest European country. The biggest question then is what are you going to do about that? And that we are still to learn.
There has been a suggestion over the last few years that Germany, of all European countries, has been rather dragging its heels in terms of supporting Ukraine. That partly arises from Germany's history, World War II in particular. Can you understand why Germany has appeared to be reluctant to perhaps throw its full weight behind the defence of Ukraine compared, say, to the UK?
Well, I have actually been working very closely with my counterparts in Bundestag, in German parliament, from the very early weeks of the big war. And I was indeed surprised to what extent that the history still plays a big role in their thinking. Not everybody. We still do have some very good friends, some politicians who were arguing for strong support to Ukraine from the very early weeks of the big invasion. But then there were those, and I had those conversations, which at first I was shocked. Then I just realized it's part of the process, so you just have to talk it through. I've heard arguments saying something like, we can't give you the German tanks because it's too painful for us to imagine German tanks in the steppes of Ukraine fighting against the Russian tanks. And I was listening to that and thinking, hey, in the fields of Ukraine, that is critical. That is where the major fights between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were taking place. They were actually taking place all over Ukraine, not in Russia, but mainly on the territory of Ukraine, which was taken over by Nazi Germany. So it took a while to explain those things and to explain to what extent Ukraine has actually suffered from the World War II. And that was unfortunately part of the process that we had to debate. I don't think that history plays such a big role right now. I think that debate was very much 2022, maybe early 2023. But what we have seen definitely is the fear from the still Chancellor, Mr. Scholz, to act forcefully. And I don't mean to be ungrateful, because the reality is that after the US, Germany has provided us second biggest portion of the military support and all other types of support. So we are grateful to Germany. But they indeed could have done it faster, because some of the things we received from Germany, if we received them early stages of the big war, they would have saved hundreds, thousands of lives. But also they would refuse to provide some of the things. And the argument there right now is not that much historical, but that of we don't want to escalate. We don't want to provoke Putin, which sounds very much like saying that the victims can provoke the attacker, which is, of course, a very wrong approach. And I think the problem was very big with Mr. Scholz himself directly. So it was him who was very strongly arguing against, for instance, providing Taurus missiles to Ukraine, which we still haven't gotten. We hope that the new chancellor, it seems like it will be Mr. Merz, will actually do that. The question is when. And of course, the situation has changed over the last couple of weeks as well. But Germany has, again, we are grateful for the support they provided. I don't mean to be ungrateful or anything, but they indeed could have done much more, especially given their size and also their history to Ukraine, because it was millions of Ukrainians who have died in the World War II.
Yes, but we often hear the account of Russia in World War II being the country which sacrificed the most troops during that conflict. But many of those Russians were, in fact, Ukrainians.
Yeah, indeed. Actually, Ukraine has lost many more people compared to Russia, which, if you look at the geography, does make sense, because the whole territory of Ukraine was taken over first by Nazis, then they were withdrawing, they were killing people as they were withdrawing, the Soviets were coming in, the Soviets were killing people on the territory of Ukraine as well. So yeah, indeed, it was to a much bigger extent Ukraine, and also that's the truth, Belarus, percentage-wise. Those two countries have actually lost much more people than Russia itself. And yes, of course, there is still this big problem where everybody identifies Soviets as Russians. But the truth is that many of the countries that Soviets occupied, including Ukraine, including the Baltics, which were occupied in 1939, they have been part of the Soviet troops. Doesn't make them Russians, though.
And part of Germany's problem is that in the post-Cold War era, it has sought rapprochement with Russia. It has sought to engage it economically, and that has led to a significant dependence on Russian gas. Now, Germany, I think, is belatedly realizing the error of its ways in that regard, but it had become heavily dependent on Russian energy. We've also got the overarching NATO umbrella, which the United States provided, and which it appears it is no longer willing to provide, or at least not willing to provide, without extracting a significant cost from Ukraine. So even as we speak, these big geopolitical shifts are taking place.
Yes, that is true. Again, to be completely honest, Germany was not the only one looking for rapprochement with the Russians. Obama's famous policy of a reset with the Russians is something that I keep on getting into my brain for over the last couple of weeks. It's actually amazing to what extent Donald Trump, who famously hates Obama, is actually acting absolutely the same towards Russia as Obama did, basically saying that, we should be friends, so we should talk to each other and so on and so forth. But with Germany, the problem was, of course, the huge dependence on very cheap Russian gas, which still remains a problem. I mean, it is a rich economy, and it's much easier for them to compete on the global markets for gas compared to some other countries, which are also similarly dependent on Russian gas, let's say Slovakia or Hungary or other Eastern European countries. But with Germany, it was this weird combination of historical guilt misplaced towards Russians, the strong reliance on the cheap Russian gas, and also politically speaking. I talked to some people in Berlin I think it was in 2022. I was trying to figure out why they're behaving their leadership, that is to say. And they said the thing is that in Berlin, they look to the west and they see the next capital is Paris. They look to the east and the next capital they see is Moscow. Of course, the situation has changed over the last, especially 3 years, when everybody realized that there is Kyiv somewhere on the road to Russia, and then it's a distinctly different country. It's a distinctly different people. I mean, they started coming to this understanding relatively recently, after years and years and years of having a very different understanding of Russia, seeing the ballet as a sign of Russia, as a symbol of Russia, not the missiles that are targeting the civilian cities. So yeah, we have to keep on working with Germany, explaining it to them, fighting against the propaganda also that Putin has launched in Germany, because the recent polls results, except they didn't just show us basically the new chancellor. They also showed amazing rise of support for the ultra-right party, the AfD, which is very scary in itself, again, given the history. but also given the current context. Well, we understand why it's scary historically speaking, but as of right now, it shows the extent to which Russian propaganda can actually undermine what seemed to be functioning democracy.
Indeed, and we've spoken a lot on the Byline Times and the Byline podcast about Russia's hybrid war, which is not just a war fought with missiles, but it is a war fought with propaganda, with misinformation. And if we're in the business of calling out nations for their relationship with Russia, I don't think the UK can escape unscathed. Of course, our capital was known for several years as Londongrad because we were so happy to facilitate the money of Russian oligarchs. But let's talk about the shift from the United States, Inna, and the NATO umbrella, which has hitherto protected Western Europe really since the end of World War II. NATO, an organization which Ukraine aspires to belong to, now appears to be in jeopardy. Do we all have to accept that the days of American protection are over and look towards a distinctive European defence policy of which Ukraine may be part?
The reality is what it is. Trump was moving in that direction during his first presidency. Even then, he was pointing out very specifically that Europeans should be paying more for their defense, which is disagreeing with Mr. Trump on many, many points. But on that, I actually agree. Europeans cannot be living is, as Mr. Rutte has said, I think it was him who said that, we cannot live in this nice historical castle with all the nice historical buildings and hoping for someone else to protect us. Europe cannot be like that. If it wants to be an independent agent on the global scene, it has to have its own military capacity as well. So Donald Trump was pointing that out in his first presidency. The Europeans probably didn't take it seriously enough. Of course, the military spendings have increased significantly, started from February 2022 because of the war, but it's still not nearly enough. And I think that up until a couple of weeks ago, most Europeans hoped that it will pass, that somehow they will manage to talk it through with the Americans, and Americans will continue business as usual. That doesn't seem to be the case right now. I think Mr. Trump is extremely committed, and I think that the divergence between the Americans and Europeans in understanding the situation in Ukraine and Russia's war against Ukraine are huge. When Mr. Trump is saying that Ukraine shouldn't have started this war, on a very personal level, it's very hurtful. It just hurts to hear that after everything we have been through. But he said that. And I don't think that there is a single leader in Europe who would claim the same. I don't even think Mr. Orban of Hungary will say something like that. So I think there is a very clear, very strong distinction between Europeans and Americans, at least American leadership right now. And of course, we have to try to mend it. After all, it's still the same value-based civilization, call it what you want, but it's something that is probably going to be part of our reality for quite some time. And I think that Europeans should start taking it seriously. And the sooner, the better. And I think that, yes, they should be thinking about European defense in some sort of alliance, whatever that could be. Because let's be honest, it's not just Mr. Trump who's undermining NATO. We also have Mr. Orban over here, Mr. Fico from Slovakia. And truth be told, if this night Putin attacks Estonia, who is there to guarantee that Estonia will actually be protected by its fellow EU member states or by its fellow NATO member states? The Baltics are extremely terrified with all of that, especially with everything that is going on in the sea over there, with all the cables being cut down and everything, which clearly points out to the Russians. I think it all points out that there should be a new architecture of defense and security on the European continent. And at this point, the biggest thing that new architecture can be based upon is upon supporting Ukraine. And I'm not just saying that as a Ukrainian. I am, of course, interested in that. But I also think that this is, unfortunately, where this fight between good and evil is taking place. And if Europeans will continue to hope that we will arm ourselves, they will continue to hold on to their fighter jets instead of giving them to Ukrainians right now. They one day might have to use them on their own territory instead of letting us use them on ours.
And it may sound like a very dark prediction, I would include the United Kingdom in that realm of threat personally. You have lies from Trump, lies like Zelensky is a dictator, lies like Zelensky only has 4% support, the suggestion that he should hold an election when under martial law, which was introduced because of the invasion by Russia, you can't hold an election. It is extremely difficult, I imagine, for Ukraine politically to grapple with this moment. And you have what seems to me to be a gangster president who is seeking to extract mineral rights from Ukraine, not in fair exchange for military support, but effectively holding a gun to the head of Ukraine, saying, we want access to your mineral rights, and unless you give them to us, we will not help to defend you. Is that a fair assessment?
That is what it looks like. And it's appalling, of course, in many ways. We have lost so much. We have lost people who died. We have lost millions who left the country. And let's be honest, at this point, very likely that majority of them will not come back, especially children. 500,000 kids of school age who have left Ukraine is a whole generation that we are never getting back, most likely. We have lost cities. Literally, there are some cities with tens of thousands of people who inhabited them 3 years ago who don't exist any longer. The city of Bakhmut doesn't exist any longer. Just doesn't exist. It's not there. We have paid immense price for this war. And now we're being forced to pay reparations, basically. That is what it feels like. It's a very perverse thinking that the victims should be paying the price of the war. I'm not even mentioning the very fact that Mr. Trump had very strongly overestimated the amount of support that Ukraine has received from the United States. It was not nearly what he's claiming. If we received the support in numbers that he claims we had, we would have won this war.
He claimed, didn't he, $500 billion, which in fact, Zelensky corrected him and actually said it was $100 billion, a not insignificant sum of money, but five times less than Trump, the liar, claimed.
And 100 billion was overall aid. That did include lots of money that was spent in the United States on the internal production and all of that, which we never got to Ukraine. So it's actually much less. It's like 12-13% of what Mr. Trump is claiming. And then we have been forced into that agreement, which seems just counterintuitive and also, I don't know, lacking of any empathy. That's a strange thing to say. That's how it feels. It's like you are forcing the rape victim to pay for the defense while talking to the rapist and making a deal with him. That makes no sense. And it's truly, I think that Ukrainians are just offended by all of that. It's not even that we are outraged or anything. It just feels like Mr. Trump refuses to notice all the sufferings that we have been through. And I don't understand how is that possible. I mean, he has a, let's put it diplomatically, different understanding of reality, but it should somehow touch on some very basic facts. The very fact that the war is being done on Ukraine's territory clearly points out to where all the victims are and who is the victim. So it's very difficult for us to understand this line of thinking, and but that's more emotional response there. The rational response here is what to do with that. And that's something that is on all of our minds that we're thinking about.
And of course, you are an opposition MP, but is Ukraine at the moment united behind Zelensky as he grapples with these issues as well? And what is a really unenviable geopolitical situation? I can't think of anything comparable in my lifetime for a leader where battle lines are normally drawn on one side or another. But here we have a country in Europe being supported by an ally, which in the midst of the conflict appears to be changing sides. I can't imagine what it's like for him to be going through that, as well as the Ukrainian people. But is Ukraine united behind him in this very difficult moment?
As you did mention, I am the member of parliament from the opposition, but I never once doubted the legitimacy of Mr. Zelensky as a president. I disagree with him on multiple issues of the internal policy, which is part of democracy. That is what Russia doesn't have. But precisely because Mr. Zelensky is not nearly a dictator, we disagree. I can criticize him. I can criticize the decisions made by his party, but I would never, ever undermine his legitimacy. He is completely within his right when he says that Ukraine cannot do elections under martial law. It's legally not possible. It's in our constitution, and it was put there way before Mr. Zelensky was even thinking about going to politics. And it does make also logical sense. This night, we had another 100 of drones attacking the whole territory of Ukraine. I was sleeping through that, but throughout my sleep, I could hear some explosions in the city of Kyiv. And I'm not even talking about some cities which are closer to the front line, like in Kharkiv or in Zaporizhia, which are literally several kilometers away from the front line. And let's imagine that yesterday we had elections. Well, A, who guarantees the security of the voting sites? B, there are air raid alerts. Right now, let's be completely honest, most Ukrainians don't go to the shelters any longer because it's just, there is air raid alerts every night. You have to be able to get some sleep. So majority of us just try to sleep through that, as terrible as that is. Just because you have to get some sleep, you can't die of exhaustion from not sleeping. But during election night, people will be more scared, so they will have to run down to the shelter. So you voted, you put your ballot into the ballot box, then there is air raid alert. You have to run around to the shelter with that ballot box. Like, how do you guarantee security of that? How do you guarantee you don't lose any of that? How do you guarantee security for the people that the site is not being attacked? How do you make sure that people on the front line are allowed to vote? Do you ask soldiers in the trenches to walk out of the trenches to vote? We can imagine what the Russians will do then. Or you say to them, sorry, guys, you can't vote. And how is that fair? People who have literally been bleeding to defend this democracy will be deprived of their right to vote. I mean, technically, it's not that we don't want to do elections, but it's just legally impossible, technically not possible. And also, last but not least, elections is about competition. It's about fighting against each other. We don't want to do that now because that will undermine the country from the inside. So yes, I disagree with Mr. Zelensky on many issues, disagree with many policy decisions that are being made, but I don't undermine his legitimacy. I am saying he's a legitimate president. I am saying that he is not a dictator and that elections will be conducted in Ukraine in a due course according to the procedures which are set by our legislation and when it is possible to do it in a proper democratic manner.
One final thought, Inna. We have regular reports in the Byline Times and here on the podcast with our reporter Zarina Zabriskie. And Zarina does not seek to undermine the terrible tragedies that are going on in Ukraine. She talks about human safaris being conducted by Russian drones in border areas. But she also bears testament to the incredible will and determination of the Ukrainian people. This incredible spirit of defiance, the flourishing of the arts in Ukraine, even in this darkest hour.
Well, that is part of the story. And of course, if you walk outside the streets of Kyiv, it's nice and sunny today. It's actually very different from the weather. It has been 3 years ago, exactly at that time. It was cloudy and rather dark. You will have some nice cafes. You will have some nice places. Best coffee in Eastern Europe, definitely. And you can see it does seem like a vibrant city, just full of life and everything. You see, however, an abnormal number of people in the uniform. You see people walking on without legs, without arms. You see more women than men because many men are mobilized into the armed forces. But the city seems to be, very different from where it has been 3 years ago, and people are trying to live their lives. Another part of the truth is also that, yes, Ukrainians are resilient and strong, and I'm amazed myself with what we have been through over the last 3 years, and we haven't broken. But another part of the truth is that we're also extremely tired. We are exhausted, both physically and morally. It's very difficult to live in the situation where you can't plan ahead. I can't plan for my kids' summer vacation. I'm not even talking about planning a vacation with my partner, who's been in the army from day one of this war. And over 3 years, we haven't had vacations together because whenever he has vacations, he, and rightfully so, chooses to spend them with his kids from his first marriage. So it's very difficult to live in the situation where you can't plan ahead, when you can't dream, when you can't think about the future, when you are every night, yes, you pretend it's okay to be sleeping through the drones attack, but it is not. It's not part of the normal world. It's not part of the normal life. It is not the life that we planned for ourselves. It's not the life we deserve. And I want on this day, particularly the world, to remember how outraged you have been on February 24th, 2022, and act upon this outrage, because the war is still as terrifying as it was then. The war is even more deadly than it was then. So I really hope that whoever is listening to that will act upon that by talking to your government, by publicly asking for more support to Ukraine, not just in words, but in actual military aid that will be saving lives here and that will give us more space to negotiate on.
Well, listen, Inna, as far as I can tell, the people of the UK stand with you. Certainly we here on the Byline podcast and the Byline Times stand with you and wish you all the best in your brave fight. And we will keep talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And read regular updates from our reporter Zarina Zabriskie, who is in Odessa and Kherson, covering the conflict in Ukraine. Please take out a subscription to our monthly periodical, The Byline Times, which contains the best of our online articles and content that you can't read anywhere else. Head over to bylinetimes.com to take out a subscription. This episode of the Byline podcast has been produced by me, Adrian Goldberg, in Birmingham, UK. Thank you very much indeed, Inna.
Thank you. Bye-bye.